Nothing sold, not a single unit. The shelves were stocked, the jars were labeled. The queue outside Diddley Squat that morning stretched past the car park the same way it always does, because it always does now, regardless of what's on offer. And then a government agency made a phone call, and every jar came down. Revenue from that product on that day, £0, 0 pence. Everyone assumed it was a disaster. They were looking at completely the wrong number. Because this was never a product launch. It was something far more deliberate, far more structural, and far more valuable than a jar of mushroom capsules selling for £12 on a farm in Oxfordshire. And the government agency that pulled it from the shelves, they didn't stop the story. They became the story, and they did it for free. By the end of this, the only question you will have is how nobody in British retail or media has properly mapped what Diddley Squat actually is, because once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Subscribe now, because this is exactly what we do every single week. But before that, stay with me for 30 seconds, because the beginning of this story matters more than you think. Lion's Mane mushrooms had been circling the health and wellness industry for years before they ever touched a shelf at Diddley Squat. Studied extensively in East Asian medicine, growing increasingly popular in British supplement markets, claimed by proponents, and there were many, to support cognitive function, reduce neurological inflammation, and stimulate nerve growth factor production. The science was genuinely interesting, not conclusive, not licensed. Clarkson, who by 2023 had already turned a 1,000-acre loss-making farm in the Cotswolds into one of the most visited rural destinations in the United Kingdom, had begun working with a small British supplier to produce a Diddley Squat branded lion's mane extract. The logic was coherent. The farm already sold honey that people queued 40 minutes for. It sold vegetables that Instagram had turned into pilgrimage items. Adding a premium wellness product, grown, processed, and branded with the farm's identity, was not a stretch. It was an extension of exactly what was already working. The capsules arrived, they were stocked, the shop opened, then trading standards rang. The specific objection was this: the product's labeling and associated marketing contained claims about cognitive health benefits. Under UK law, specifically the Human Medicines Regulations 2012, a product making those kinds of claims requires a medicinal license. The Lion's Mane capsules did not have one. The product was in regulatory terms an unlicensed medicine. It had to come down. Zeros. Full removal. Public record. Now, here is where every other version of this story stops. Here is where this one starts. What the Lion's Mane incident actually revealed was not a failure in Diddley Squat's product development process. It revealed with remarkable precision how the entire Diddley Squat operation actually functioned. And it has almost nothing to do with farming. Stand back for one moment. Look at what a conventional farm shop is. A conventional farm shop is a retail business. It buys or produces goods. It sells them at margin. Success is measured in units shifted, revenue per square foot, repeat footfall, and stock turn. It operates in silence. Nobody films it losing money. Nobody televises its planning disputes. Nobody makes it famous by trying to shut it down. Diddley Squat is not that. It is not a farm. It is not a farm shop. It is a content engine. And the farm, the shop, the planning battles, the failed products, the queues, and yes, the government interventions, they are all fuel. Every single one of them. The failure is the product. That is not a metaphor. That is the operating model. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now, because what comes next is the part that even people who follow this story closely have never fully joined up, and you will not want to miss it. And now, right now, is where this story stops being about mushrooms and starts being about something that the British media, the farming industry, and the retail sector have collectively failed to understand about what Clarkson built in Chipping Norton. Jeremy Clarkson, the son of a Doncaster toy salesman who spent 30 years being famous for driving cars badly and saying things that made television executives nervous, did not set out to build a media empire on a farm in Oxfordshire. He bought Diddley Squat in 2008 for approximately £6 million, a decision he has described as made with the same rigor he applies to most large financial decisions, which is to say almost none. The farm produced negligible income for over a decade. That is not rewritten history. That is the actual record. What changed was Amazon. In 2021, the first series of Clarkson's Farm aired on Prime Video. Amazon's annual payment to produce the series, reported at between 10 and 12 million pounds, immediately recontextualized every loss the farm had ever made. The failed crops, the planning rejections, the equipment disasters. The moment Kaleb Cooper, who had been working at Diddley Squat before Clarkson had ever set foot on it, looked directly at camera and explained, with complete and unfiltered contempt, that a man worth hundreds of millions of pounds could not operate a basic tractor. Kaleb Cooper was not cast, he was not auditioned, he was not discovered. He was already there. You cannot manufacture that. You can only find it and then point a camera at it. And once Amazon pointed a camera at it, every single thing that happened at Diddley Squat became content, including the things that went wrong, especially the things that went wrong. The farm shop opened in conditions that West Oxfordshire District Council found immediately objectionable. The initial structure was deemed non-compliant. There were enforcement notices. There were appeals. There was a prolonged, publicly documented battle between one of the most famous men in Britain and a local planning committee that, and this matters, believed they were exercising legitimate regulatory authority. They were not. They were co-producing the show. Every objection they raised became an episode. Every enforcement notice became a news cycle. Every rejected planning application added viewers who wanted to know whether the council had won. The council thought they had leverage. They were providing the narrative. And they did it without a production fee, without a contract, and without apparently noticing what was happening until the show had 2 series in the top 10 most watched programs in Amazon Prime history. The Lion's Mane incident followed the same structural logic, and this is the part that no other analysis of this story has properly mapped. When Trading Standards removed the capsules from the shelf, 3 things happened simultaneously. First, the story went global, not British farming niche global, actual global. American health and wellness outlets picked it up. The phrase Lion's Mane Diddley Squat generated search volumes that dwarfed the farm's own web traffic. People who had never heard of Clarkson's Farm were now learning what it was through a story about a product they could not buy. That is the most effective kind of advertising. It is the advertising people seek out rather than scroll past. Second, the product's absence made it mythological. This is a principle so well understood in luxury retail that entire brand strategies are built around artificial scarcity. Diddley Squat achieved it by accident, or appeared to. The capsules that nobody could legally purchase became the capsules that everyone wanted. Online forums dedicated to Clarkson's Farm filled with questions about whether they would return, whether you could source Lion's Mane elsewhere, whether the recipe would change if it came back. The zero-revenue product became a multi-month conversation. Third, and this is the detail that competitors and commentators missed entirely, the incident reinforced the farm's identity rather than damaging it. Diddley Squat's entire brand proposition is structured around one idea, that doing things properly, locally, honestly, and with genuine conviction sometimes puts you in direct conflict with systems that don't understand what you're doing. The council trying to shut down the shop that fits the story. The MHRA flagging a wellness product for unlicensed medical claims that fits the story. A massive brewery offering 50 million pounds for Hawkstone and being turned down, that fits the story. None of these things were meant to fit the story, they just did. Because the story is always the same story. And the audience, 250,000 visitors a year to the farm, millions more watching from 6 continents. They understand it intuitively, even if they couldn't articulate the mechanism. The product that failed a government lab test. It never relaunched. It never needed to. The estimated earned media value of the Lion's Mane removal, based on comparable press coverage metrics for brand awareness campaigns in the British health and wellness sector, exceeded the projected annual revenue of the product itself by a multiple that no marketing department at any conventional farm shop would believe if you showed them the numbers. The jar that never sold was worth more than the jar that did. That is not a farm shop logic, that is a flywheel. And here is where you have to step back completely and look at the full picture, because what Clarkson and critically his partner Lisa Hogan have assembled at Diddley Squat is not a collection of rural businesses. It is a single integrated system in which every component amplifies every other component, and in which failure, genuine, documented, sometimes painful failure, functions as content that drives awareness, that drives footfall, that drives revenue, that funds the next attempt that sometimes also fails. Lisa Hogan, who built the farm shop's supplier relationships and brand architecture largely, while the cameras and the public were focused elsewhere, understood something about the Diddley Squat customer that conventional retail has still not properly internalized. The customer does not come for the product. The customer comes for the story they have already been told. The honey is good. The vegetables are good. The Lion's Mane capsules were, from everything available, a well-sourced premium product. But none of that is why the queue forms before the shop opens. The queue forms because the audience has been watching this farm for 3 series. They know the fields, they know the disasters. They know Kaleb's views on anyone who did not grow up on a farm and believes they understand farming. They have an emotional relationship with a retail destination, and that is something Tesco, with £65 billion in annual revenue, cannot replicate with a loyalty card. It cannot be bought. It cannot be constructed in a marketing meeting. It can only be built over years of letting people watch something real, including the parts that go wrong, including the government lab tests, including the empty shelves where the mushroom capsules used to be. Hawkstone Beer, which Clarkson began producing using barley grown on the farm, now generates over £21 million in annual revenue, up from $7.8 million the year prior. That is a 134% growth rate. Carlsberg, one of the largest brewing operations in the world, reportedly offered £50 million for the brand. The offer was rejected because Hawkstone, without Diddley Squat, without Clarkson's Farm, without the documentary infrastructure and the emotional relationship with the audience, is a beer brand. And a beer brand at £50 million is worth considerably less than an integrated content and agricultural enterprise whose value compounds with every series, every planning dispute, and yes, every product that fails a government lab test and makes the national news. The Farmer's Dog Pub, purchased and renovated for approximately £1 million, now employs 146 people, 360 car park spaces. In rural Oxfordshire, that is not a pub. That is an anchor point for a destination economy that Diddley Squat created from a field and a documentary series, and a man who genuinely did not know how to drive a tractor. But here is what remains genuinely uncertain, and this matters because this story deserves honesty as much as it deserves admiration. The Diddley Squat model is not replicable, not because it is protected by patents or planning law or corporate structure, because it depends on variables that cannot be engineered. It depends on Clarkson being Clarkson, a specific human being with a specific 3-decade relationship with the British public that generates a specific emotional response that cannot be transferred, franchised, or acquired. It depends on Kaleb being Kaleb, a man who was genuinely already there before any of this began. It depends on Amazon continuing to see value in funding what is structurally an extraordinarily expensive promotion for a farm shop in the Cotswolds. What happens to the valuation, the farm currently estimated at £45 million in total, when the series ends? When Clarkson eventually steps back? When the cameras are gone and the queue has to form for the product alone rather than the story around it? Nobody has answered that question, including, as far as anyone can tell, the people who built it. What is certain is this: stand back. Look at the full picture. A man bought a farm for £6 million. The farm earned almost nothing for over a decade. Amazon began paying £10 to £12 million a year to film it losing money. A farm shop opened against the explicit wishes of the local council, and the council's objections became the show. A wellness product was pulled from the shelves by a government agency, and the product's absence generated more awareness than its presence ever could have. A beer built in the farm's own fields rejected a £50 million acquisition offer. A pub employs 146 people in a village that had no reason to expect them, and somewhere in a government office, in a filing cabinet that nobody checks very often, there is a regulatory report about a jar of lion's mane mushroom capsules that were found to be making unlicensed medical claims and were removed from sale before a single unit was purchased. The report concludes that the product failed. It did not fail. It was the most cost-efficient piece of brand communication in the history of British farm retail. And the people who wrote the report, they paid for it themselves. That is not a coincidence. That is a flywheel. And once a flywheel is moving fast enough, even the forces designed to stop it become part of the motion.